Dusk had settled over our quiet suburb. I was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a soft blanket, listening to my husband, Ethan, move around in the next room. It felt like he was trying to find an excuse not to look me in the eye. My tea was growing cold in the cup I held, and I kept wondering when everything had gone so wrong. That morning, we'd still been a happy couple planning a weekend trip to my parents'. But by evening, everything had changed with a single phone call on my personal phone. Ethan overheard a few words about my old clients, and it became impossible to hide any longer. I could sense that Ethan wasn't just angry. There was deep hurt and a strange curiosity in his eyes. He wanted to know what exactly I'd been hiding. I sat opposite Ethan in an armchair, trying to keep my voice steady. My hands trembled slightly. "You remember, when we first met," I began. "I had just finished graduate school and was working at this agency. I told you I was a secretary, which wasn't a total lie. But I never told you I was also an escort. Not for very long, maybe a couple of years. But it left a huge mark on me." I couldn't look him in the eye. I heard him inhale sharply. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he finally asked, the hurt obvious in his tone. "Why am I only hearing about this now?" "I was terrified," I whispered, "afraid you'd walk away. You always said you valued honesty above all else, and what I did was the opposite of your idea of purity. I tried to leave it behind and start fresh with you." Silence fell between us. I stared at my lap, ashamed. At last, Ethan got up and stood by the window, staring out at the dark sky. "All right," he said quietly. "I don't know how to react, but I do want to understand. So tell me everything. Don't hide or sugarcoat it. I need to know." My mind flashed back a few years, and I closed my eyes against the painful memories. I'd been a struggling grad student living in a rental place, nearly drowning in debt when a contact introduced me to an escort agency. It seemed like easy money at first. Fancy dinners, nice clothes. Soon, it became more than just socializing. Ethan listened in silence, his jaw clenched. I could see tension in every muscle. "How did it happen?" he asked softly. "Tell me in more detail." I took a shaky breath. In the beginning, it was just a matter of accompanying men to events, business dinners, banquets. Over time, some clients wanted more, and I let it happen. Not with everyone, but there were a few who became what you might call regulars. They were like benefactors. The lines blurred very quickly. Eventually, I realized I couldn't keep doing it and left the agency. Then I moved, met you, and tried to forget any of it ever happened. He said nothing. The silence was crushing. I wanted to curl up and hide, but I knew running away wouldn't fix it now. Ethan had a pained, almost anguished curiosity in his gaze. The next day, we barely spoke. Ethan seemed lost in thought. By evening, he finally sat down next to me and said, "I want to hear it all. Every story, every detail. I know it's going to hurt, but not knowing feels even worse." I felt chills ripple through me. "Are you sure you want that? It might just make things more painful." He nodded, face set with determination. "I'm sure. Maybe I can handle it if I know the whole truth. Otherwise, my mind will torture me with fantasies." And so, I began a long, uncomfortable confession. I started on my second year of graduate school when I took my first escort job. I was broke, needed money quickly. The first client was Anthony, a businessman in his early 40s. We met in a high-end restaurant. I was so nervous I nearly backed out, but he was polite and calm. He took me to an upscale event, where I basically acted as arm candy. No more than that. Later, he offered to drive me home in his Mercedes. At his penthouse, we drank wine on the balcony. He didn't push me to do anything. I left feeling I'd gotten away with something harmless, more or less. "That's it?" Ethan asked, as though he wanted to hear something more salacious. "Yeah, it was surprisingly tame. The real line got crossed a bit later. Clients multiplied. Some only wanted a dinner companion. Others made it clear they expected intimacy. That was how I met Kyle, an attorney who traveled on business a lot. He hated fancy dinners and preferred to go straight to a hotel. I sometimes liked skipping the pretenses as well. Though I knew it was work, he had a way with words. He knew how to compliment and seduce. I'd catch myself forgetting, just for a moment, that we had a business arrangement. Ethan's expression was pained, yet he gripped my hand, silently urging me on. He was determined to learn how far my past went. Did you care about any of these men? Ethan asked. In a way, yes. I was emotionally vulnerable. They gave me attention, money, but it felt like a performance. Over time, I realized it was wearing me down. The money was good, but I felt empty. He paused, looked away, then said quietly, So how did you get out? One day, the emotional toll was just too high. I had enough money saved to cover my debts, so I left the agency. I sank into a depression and moved to a different city with a friend's help. Then I met you, and I just wanted a fresh start. The room went silent. Ethan stared into space, wrestling with his thoughts. Finally, he spoke. I don't know how to handle this, but I need to keep hearing about it. I feel like it might be the only way to accept it. Later that evening, we sat in the living room with dimmed lights. My voice trembled as I relived encounters, like Paul, who invited me to his secluded country house, or George, who simply wanted quick encounters to blow off steam. I explained how each of them was different, some gentle, some rushed, some caring, some purely transactional. Ethan listened intently, his breathing growing ragged. I could tell it both tormented and oddly fascinated him. After a few hours, he reached for me, pulling me into a tight embrace. I hate these images in my head, he whispered, but I can't help being affected. I stroked his hair. I'm scared too, but we have to go through it. We have to. That night, we shared an intense closeness, a storm of jealousy, pain, and fierce longing, as if forging a new bond in the midst of heartbreak. When the confessions ended, Ethan kissed me deeply. I expected him to be distant, but he held me as if I might disappear. Our breathing became ragged, and we found ourselves in the bedroom, clinging to each other with desperate need. It was as though he wanted to erase all my former lovers from my memory, to reclaim me fully, and I wanted to show him that I belonged only to him now. Our intimacy felt raw and electric. Afterward, tears welled in my eyes, tears of release, love, and sorrow at once. He noticed and pulled me close. I'm not turning away from you, he murmured. I just don't know how to deal with it yet. But I love you. I love you too, I whispered. And for the first time since everything blew up, I felt a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, we could overcome this. We fell asleep at dawn, wrapped in each other's arms. By midday, we woke up, quietly prepared breakfast. Ethan gently took my hand. You're still the woman I love. I just want to be sure there are no more lies. I nodded. No more. I promise. We both knew there was a lot to work through, but we had begun. Late that afternoon, Ethan returned from work looking tense. We hardly exchanged words. Finally, he sat me down. I can't get your stories out of my head, he admitted. It's tearing me up with jealousy, but at the same time, I feel this overwhelming need to hear more, to know every detail. It's insane. I placed my hand over his. I understand. If it helps you process, I'll keep talking. It's not easy for me, but at least we'll face it together. He nodded, eyes showing fear and determination. Yes, please. I sighed, thinking back to a man named Maxwell, an IT specialist with timid looks but surprisingly bold fantasies. He wanted me to dominate him in a light BDSM scenario. We'd meet in a hotel room. I'd wear a strict outfit, and he'd kneel, beg for my touch. It felt strange but not unpleasant. Mostly, I felt I was performing a role. Ethan listened, riveted, face stormy with jealousy, yet laced with intense curiosity. When it got physical, was it good for you? He asked. Physically, sometimes yes, I replied. But I always felt like I was watching myself from the outside. After all, it was still paid intimacy. Ethan ran a hand over his face. It torments me to picture you in these scenarios, and yet I can't stop imagining it. I took his hand, silently sharing his turmoil. When I finished the story, Ethan pulled me into a rough kiss. We ended up in the bedroom again, the same powerful wave of passion and jealousy uniting us. It was as if he needed to several days passed in relative calm. Then Ethan approached me one evening. You mentioned you had some emotional involvement with certain regulars. I need you to tell me about that. About anyone you had deeper feelings for. I hesitated but finally spoke. There was someone named Michael Stevenson. He was about 30, but everyone in the agency called him by his full name like that. He was smart, charismatic, easy to talk to. He made me laugh. I almost forgot it was paid companionship. It felt real, like I was falling in love. Ethan frowned, his voice thick. And what happened? He had to move away suddenly. Business or family stuff. He never asked me to go with him. It hurt so badly. I realized I was nothing more than a fling. I quit the agency soon after. Ethan closed his eyes, struggling with the image of me truly caring for another man. God, he murmured. Knowing you loved him is worse than just sex. I tried to comfort him, but he stepped back to process on his own. Days went by. Ethan and I hardly spoke about my past for a while. We each needed space. Then, one evening, he suggested dinner and a follow-up conversation. We sipped wine, discussing daily life first. But eventually, the question came out. You mentioned escort jobs sometimes involve couples, he asked carefully. You said there was once a pair who hired you? Yes, I admitted, cheeks burning. They were a married couple who wanted a third person to spice things up. The pay was huge, and I was foolish enough to try. Ethan's face tensed. What happened? They invited me to a hotel suite. First we had drinks, tried to relax. Then, we ended up on the bed, all three of us. She wanted to explore intimacy with a woman while he watched and joined in. It was disorienting. I just did what they expected. I left feeling confused and a bit hollow. The money was the only silver lining. Ethan stared, pale. Wow, he whispered. I hadn't imagined that. I bowed my head. I hated telling you, but you asked. After a long pause, he just took my hand, his expression drained. That night, Ethan unexpectedly pulled me into a passionate embrace. We ended up making love again with a desperate intensity. I sensed how jealousy still simmered in him, yet the desire to reclaim me was stronger. It was a volatile mix that we embraced together. We woke up entwined. Over breakfast, Ethan looked more at peace than he had in days. You're part of me, he said quietly. I still feel anger, but I need you more than ever. Maybe we can move forward, somehow. I smiled softly, relief filling me. We'll try. One step at a time. We thought we were making progress, but then I got another phone call from Arthur, the old logistics guy at the escort agency. He invited me to a reunion of former coworkers. My stomach twisted at the thought of returning to that environment. Why would I want to see everyone from that place again? I asked, unsettled. Arthur shrugged over the phone. We're just having a casual dinner. Thought you might want to come. Some news and updates. No pressure. I told Ethan that evening. He tensed. What do you want to do? Probably nothing, I replied. Ignore it. But maybe I need to face them and close that door for good. Ethan looked torn. I'll stand by you, whatever you decide. I spent days wavering. Part of me feared dredging up the past. Another part felt it might bring closure. Ethan surprised me by offering. Let me come with you. I'll stay quietly on the sidelines if that helps. But I don't want you going alone. I was both touched and anxious, but agreed. It seemed more honest that way. We arrived at an upscale hotel restaurant. My heart pounded as we entered. Familiar faces, some from the agency, exchanged curious glances at the sight of me and Ethan. Arthur greeted us, introducing Ethan as my husband. People looked awkward, some politely friendly. We sat at a table, recognized a few escorts I'd known well, Kate, Sylvia. They said hi, asked how my life was. I gave a brief summary, omitting painful details. One new hire piped up, Oh, are you that Roni, who got the biggest tips back in the day? I blushed, hating that Ethan heard this. He kept his composure, but was clearly uneasy. After a while, a man I half recalled, someone named Andrew, stopped by, recognized me from a party years ago, started talking. The conversation left me rattled. Ethan watched from the side, tension radiating off him. Eventually, I told Ethan I wanted to leave. We made our polite goodbyes. Outside, in the chilly evening, we both breathed a sigh of relief. In the car, Ethan asked, How do you feel? Worn out, I admitted. I don't need that world anymore. It's behind me. He squeezed my hand. I'm glad we left. I had this overwhelming jealousy seeing those people who knew you in that context. I nodded. Thank you for coming with me. A few weeks later, in the middle of that calmer stretch, someone new showed up at the gathering. It was a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard. Turned out to be a friend of Elijah, a client from long ago. He recognized me, said hi, used my old stage name. Ethan noticed and shot me a tense glance. But the man only chatted briefly, then left. From that moment, Ethan grew more suspicious about how many men from my past might still be around. We had another long talk that night. At home, I explained who Elijah was, a wealthy client who loved extravagant parties. I told Ethan that nights out with Elijah ended with us going back to his place. That yes, it was a fairly regular sexual relationship. He struggled with the mental images, but insisted on listening to every word. When I finished, tears glittered in his eyes. It hurts, he muttered. But maybe hearing it is better than imagining worse. He clutched me tightly. I stroked his hair, whispering that I loved him and that I belonged to him now. That confession once again fueled an intense sexual encounter between us, jealousy and desire exploding in the bedroom. We tore at each other's clothes as if to overwrite the old memories with our own passion. When the wave passed, we held each other, breathless and teary-eyed, relieved to still be together. We awoke late the next morning, cherishing a quiet breakfast. It felt like the first morning in a while that wasn't overshadowed by revelations. The tension had eased, replaced by a fragile serenity. Let's spend the day just being us, Ethan suggested. Like in the old days? I smiled, wholeheartedly agreeing. As our conversations went deeper, we decided to visit a couples therapist. Her name was Dr. Galena Rivers, calm, empathetic, with a cozy, softly lit office. At first, Ethan and I were both nervous. So why are you here? She asked gently. Ethan began. I found out my wife used to be an escort. It's destroying me with jealousy, yet I love her. I want to keep our marriage. Dr. Rivers nodded calmly. And you, Veronica, how do you feel? I feel guilt, shame, relief that the secret's out, but I'm scared Ethan might leave. The therapist asked about our goals. We both wanted to overcome jealousy, build trust, and not let the past define us. She introduced breathing exercises to cope with painful images and taught us to communicate more honestly. We left feeling drained but hopeful. Soon after, my mom invited us over for dinner. It was the first time we'd seen my parents in months. I knew they would sense something was off. Dad asked Ethan about work, while Mom served up homemade dishes. Eventually, Mom took me aside. Is everything okay with you two? You seem tense. I confessed we were going through a rough patch, but assured her we were handling it. She respected my privacy, only saying, I'm here if you need me. Driving home, Ethan took my hand. Thank you for not diving into details. I'm not ready for that with your parents. Me neither, I admitted. We quietly understood that some truths weren't meant to be shared beyond our marriage. A few days later, an old college acquaintance, Andrew, called out of the blue, wanting to catch up over coffee. He knew about my escort past, at least tangentially. I hung up after a polite chat, feeling uneasy. Ethan immediately noticed. Who was that? I told him. He frowned, uncomfortable that yet another man knew my secrets before he did. Sensing his tension, I offered not to meet Andrew at all. He told me to decide for myself, but admitted it made him uneasy. I texted Andrew, politely declining a meetup. Ethan looked relieved, though still haunted. That night in bed, Ethan kissed my shoulder and sighed. Sometimes I feel like I'm losing it. I picture these men who knew you, your secrets, but at the same time, I can't deny how it fires me up. Then let's channel it positively, I suggested. We can keep turning those feelings into intimacy rather than shame. He nodded, kissing me more fervently. We made love, letting the tension burn off in the heat of our passion. In the following weeks, the therapist continued guiding us. We learned to calmly name our fears, to let them out instead of letting them boil inside. Our fights became less explosive. We found ways to transform jealousy into deeper erotic energy between us. Finally, we reached a new normal. It wasn't a perfect fairy tale, but we no longer felt we were drowning in secrets. We'd grown closer, calmer. One day, I found an unmarked envelope in our mailbox. Inside was a note. "Hello, Veronica. I'm back in town. Perhaps you'd like to meet? MS." My heart pounded. I knew it had to be Michael Stevenson, the man I once fell for as a young escort who'd left without warning. Now, he was back. Wanting to see me? I showed Ethan. He read it, jaw tightening. "The one you actually loved?" "Yes," I confirmed. I have no clue what he wants. Maybe just curiosity. Ethan's mouth set in a grim line. "If you want closure, maybe talk to him. But I hate the idea." I nodded, heart thudding. "If I do meet him, it'll be in a public place, and I'll tell you everything afterward. No secrets." I texted Michael at his old number. Surprisingly, he replied at once. We agreed to meet at a cafe called Riverview on Saturday afternoon. Ethan insisted on coming too, to sit at a separate table. I agreed. I didn't want secrecy. At 4 p.m., I sat by the window, nursing a mineral water, my heart beating fast. Michael entered soon after, tall, well-dressed, with confident eyes I remembered too well. "Veronica," he said smoothly, "you look even more stunning than before." I stayed seated. "Hello, Michael. Why did you reach out?" He ordered a coffee. I felt a swirl of old emotions, hurt, resentment, nostalgia. "I moved back for business," he said. "Thought of you. We once had something special." "You left me with no explanation," I replied bitterly. I was heartbroken. He shrugged regretfully, claiming family and business issues. He never offered to bring me along. I told him I'd moved on, that I was married. He glanced around and spotted Ethan watching from the corner. "So that's your husband?" Michael asked, a half-smile on his lips. "Didn't expect an audience." "It's not an audience," I said, my voice firm. "He's here because our marriage is built on honesty now, and so we can finish this once and for all." Michael nodded. "So there's no chance for us to reconnect, then?" "No. None," I said. "I don't want or need anything from you. My life is different now." He exhaled, stood up. "All right. I had to see for myself. Take care, Veronica." He placed a few bills on the table and walked out. I watched him go, feeling strangely freed. Ethan came over, clearly relieved but still tense. "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah." I told him I love my husband. That's all he needs to know. Ethan kissed my hand. "Thank you for ending it right in front of me." Back home, we spoke about it over tea. I described the brief conversation. Ethan listened, tight-lipped but calmer than I'd expected. "I guess that's it," he murmured. "No more illusions." I nodded. "Yes, it's over." He squeezed my hand, and I felt a surge of gratitude. My dad's 60th birthday arrived, so Ethan and I went to a small party with relatives. We chatted, laughed, accepted the usual questions about children and the future. Mom seemed relieved to see us relaxed and affectionate. She gave me a look that said, "I'm glad whatever was wrong is getting better." I only smiled in return, thankful that we'd made real progress. Our nights became more adventurous. One evening, after a therapy session, we decided to enact each other's fantasies. I confided I'd always wanted a little teacher-student role-play with us both as consenting adults. Ethan teased me for it, but we embraced the idea. I dressed in a pencil skirt and blouse, hair pinned back. He played the cheeky student vibe, though it was all in good fun. The playful tension made us both laugh, then ignited a fiery passion. In moments, we'd abandoned the pretense and were lost in raw desire. The release was profound, like healing old wounds through new, shared experiences. We still had occasional flare-ups. If an old acquaintance messaged me, Ethan would tense. But we'd talk, share, show messages if needed. Over time, he began to trust one had no desire to return to escorting or hide anything. I, in turn, felt safer knowing I didn't have to walk on eggshells. "We're rebuilding from scratch," Ethan said. "It's like our foundation was shaky before, and now we're pouring a new one." I held his arm. "And I hope this foundation is permanent." Some time passed, and we realized we'd reached a calmer phase. One lazy morning, as we lay in bed, I brought up a topic I'd always avoided. "So, kids?" My mom keeps asking, how do you feel about it? Ethan met my gaze, thoughtful. I'm starting to want that too. To have a child in a home built on honesty. My heart fluttered. I was afraid to think about it before. But maybe now, it's possible. We decided we wouldn't rush, but we'd keep it in mind as our next big step. Sure enough, life tested us one more time. Random text appeared from an unknown number. It read, "Hey gorgeous, remember me? It's Kyle, your old client. I found out where you work now. Care for some of our good old nights?" My stomach lurched. I quickly showed Ethan. He looked furious, but not at me. More at the gall of the man. How about I just block him? I suggested. No response. No conversation. Ethan exhaled. Yes, do that. If he keeps trying, we'll do something else. But I trust you. I felt relief. Thank you. I'm so sick of these ghosts. He wrapped an arm around me, face still stormy but calmer than before. Months later, we both felt genuinely renewed. Our therapist said we'd made significant progress and could move to maintenance sessions if needed. We'd learned to handle old triggers without letting them tear us apart. We started talking about trying for a baby. Ethan even looked into bigger apartments, or possibly a house. One evening, we sat on our balcony, watching the summer sunset. I leaned into him, a soft breeze brushing my hair. He kissed my temple and said, "I'm proud of us. We didn't give up. I used to think I could never handle your past, but now I see our love is stronger than I ever imagined." My eyes brimmed with tears of gratitude. I'm proud of you too. You stayed even when the truth was brutal. And now we have a real foundation, a partnership built on honesty. He put a blanket around my shoulders. Let's keep it that way. No secrets, no shame. Just us. Amen, I breathed, leaning in for a kiss. And so we come to a calm, hopeful chapter in Veronica and Ethan's journey. They've confronted the darkest parts of her past, endured jealousy, heartbreak, and shame, but have emerged closer, more honest, and deeply in love. While life can always bring new challenges, their bond now rests on a foundation of openness and trust. If this is where you choose to end the story, we have our resolution. Should you wish to explore further, perhaps showing what happens when they start a family, or delving into new twists, they stand ready to face it together, stronger than ever.